So in today's video we're going to build this cool little crosscut sled that I badly needed for my shop. It only takes about an hour or two to do and will come in handy, and you'll probably use it every day in your workshop. So let's get started. So if any of you have a kind of cheap table saw, you'll know what these little miter gauges are like. They're just always loose and just never completely accurate. Now it does a decent job at times, like you can see here cutting this, it's not bad, but it's not very reliable or consistent. So having a crosscut sled that you know is 90 degrees is key to making good joinery. This is another reason why eventually I'm going to build a table saw fence, because it only goes so far and it can be quite annoying at times. So here I'm just measuring the depth and width of the slots. The width needs to be completely accurate, whereas the depth, so long as it's the exact depth or even a bit thinner, will work fine. Now something just to talk about here is when you're cutting thin strips on the table saw, try and actually cut the tin strip on the outside instead of having the tin strip stuck between the blade and the fence. This could result in kickback and throw the tin piece of wood back at you. And you actually see when I'm finished the cut, even though it's on the outside, it still wants to go towards me. So just make sure you do stand to the side just in case the worst happens. But I do recommend cutting it this way instead of using the tin strip squeezed between the fence and the blade. One of the good things about this table saw fence is you can flip it, so when you're cutting thin strips it makes things a bit easier and gives you more room for your push stick. So you can just see here I'm flipping it over, and I just did a little test cut just to make sure it was going to fit in the slot nicely. They do turn out a bit tight, but remember you are going to be sanding it and you are going to be putting wax on it later, so a bit tight is better than being too loose, because once it's too loose you can't really use them. I've just put the slots in and shimmed them up using a few pieces of scrap wood, and just high enough so that I can push some pre-drilled holes into it, so I'll know where to put my screws and to make sure that it's all nice and square. And as you can see here, it's a bit tight, but remember again, this will be loosened up later. So I'm just cutting a slot about halfway into the piece of wood. This is just so I can make the fence nice and square. What I recommend is actually screwing your fence, your flat piece of wood, in one corner, so that way you can use it as a pivot point. And once you put the square up against the blade and the fence, just make sure it's as square as possible and then cut right through it. Now as you can see here, I completely didn't think about my splitter and it got in the way. So what I'm doing here is just cutting a small piece of wood in the bandsaw to put on the top of the fence, so that way the splitter never gets caught up. And you don't need to go through the whole crosscut sled if you don't want to, and some people even put a little block at the end so their hands don't get cut. And here you can just see I put a load of wax on the whole bottom of the base, and this makes it nice and easy to push. So just giving you a little tester here of how square it turned out, and I have to say I lucked out. A lot of the time you will need to readjust it, but this turned out really good and square. So as you can see here, a simple test is just to do a cut and get your square up against it and see how square it is. Or the next method I'll show you is actually where I think it's called the 5 cut method, and it's where you basically get a square piece of wood, and each time you cut an edge you put that edge up against your board, and by your last cut, the 5th cut, it'll basically times your error by 5. So even though your thing could only be off by half a degree, by the 5th cut it'll be off whatever 2 or 3 degrees. So it just kind of brings out the error and just shows if you don't have it perfectly square. And again, I looked out, it was pretty damn square. So I hope you enjoyed today's video, guys. I don't have woodworker appreciation this week just because I think every single woodworking YouTuber has done a crosscut sled at this stage. So if you're new to my channel, please comment, rate and subscribe, and even share the video because it helps out a lot. And if you really want to try and support the channel, I have these new "A Clean Shop is a Safe Shop" t-shirts on my Spreadshirt store. And if you're in England or Ireland, the postage is a bit dearer than the US, but you don't get charged any extra customs rates or anything like that. So I think to get one in Ireland or England's about $20, and then in the US I think it's about $16, and it'll help me out a lot because I get commission for each t-shirt that sells. But if you can't, that's perfectly fine as well. So I just want to say thanks for watching, and remember, a clean shop is a safe shop.